Great news everybody, Outriders is getting a pretty big update, actually probably the biggest yet. We're going to get a very lengthy dev update thread tomorrow on Reddit, but I do want to talk about some other stuff in the meantime and kind of go over some of the stuff that I kind of wish change, maybe even make a few predictions of what is about to change in the new update, because chances are there's going to probably be a little bit of rebalancing in there as well, and the removal of a certain exploit that currently exists in the game. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. I want to start things off with, of course, the recent announcement by the Outriders team, us typing the big Reddit dev news update to be published tomorrow, which is going to be April 8th. What about, we hear you say? Yes, the Reddit news update will probably cover that too. Also typewriters because of the anomaly and stuff. So this is the recent announcement right here. It seems that everybody's getting ready for another lengthy update for the game. Now, does this mean that the update will also drop tomorrow? Well, it might or it might not. My initial prediction was it's going to happen on Thursday, but it could very well be pushed a few days back. So it might very well be on Friday or maybe over the weekend, but it remains to be seen. Now, there are some multiplayer fixes in there too, especially if you're an Xbox user. We have made some backend tweaks that may improve your multiplayer experience. To better realize these changes, we recommend turning crossplay off if you're not using it. Please let us know if your multiplayer connectivity has improved as of now, and this is in regards to another fix that they have applied in like the long list of fixes that they have supposedly applied for the multiplayer. Now, I will say this about the multiplayer: I checked it at least a few times earlier today with quite a ton of people, and it finally actually worked, though I will mention that in each situation I was the host, so I'm not really sure if anybody else was experiencing any bad connections, but personally I was running it very smoothly and my party seemed to run very smoothly as well. Of course, still no crossplay. This was all on PC via Steam, so totally let me know down below what is your connection to the servers and if you encountered any other issues. Now, of course, this isn't going to be only for Xbox. Please focus on PlayStation experience. One of the users has replied over on Twitter: we are doing what we can on all platforms. We are not prioritizing any platform over the other, so when these updates will come, they should affect all of the platforms equally. Now, what are some of the changes that we should expect on top of stability, performance, and maybe some more to the servers and whatnot? Well, here is one of them that I would immediately cross off the list. I would immediately say goodbye to the current kind of exploit that lets you get a ton of legendaries in a very short amount of time, relatively. So we've talked about this a few days ago, doing it at your own risk and whatnot, but honestly, if you just push in for those expeditions, you're not going to need that method, really. So might as well not just put your account at risk and get branded as a cheater, which will prevent you from co-oping with other people who are playing the legit way. Now, another few ones are personally just my wish list, so to speak. One of them is for the insane snipers that exist in the game. Now, there is a way to kind of juke these by just like peeking and waiting for them to shoot, but sometimes they can shoot you from the other side of the map, which is really unreasonable for full damage, so no damage fall off, and on top of that, they can literally aim like between the tightest of spaces and not miss you at all. And on top of that, if you're out in the open and you see that mark on your character, you're as good as hit. You're not going to be able to dodge that. Like, it's extremely difficult to dodge that, and usually you have to fire first if you want to like do any of that and avoid the incoming damage. Another one on my wish list, though I'm not even sure if it's important anymore, but this was for the marker that guides you towards your next destination. Like, let's say you pin a quest, like you just started a quest. Sometimes, or should I say like at least half of the time, it completely screws up. It brings you in a completely different direction, and sometimes I was literally in front of my point of interest, like a monster hunt and whatnot, and that marker was literally trying to guide me the other way around for some damn reason. So hopefully this is going to be fixed, though at this point I kind of already know exactly where all of the missions are and where all of the destinations are located because I just played the heck out of this game. Finally, another change that I would expect would be a slight rebalance of certain classes or maybe certain items. Currently, as I've said, the game is a little bit, I would say, broken, but not really, because it's kind of fun and it is intended, but it's kind of incentivizing glass cannon type of builds a little bit too much, and everything else kind of falls off. If you're trying to go with a spell damage build, it could possibly work in a group scenario, but it's nowhere near as great as something with just weapon and weapon damage, and even more so if you're trying to play as something like a tank, especially if you're trying to do solo. Just forget it, because you're not going to be able to do that. So there's a couple of routes in which the developers could come in and fix this, and one of them is the good way, the other one is the completely wrong and bad way. And I'm going to start with the bad way, which would be nerfing already existing, let's just say, powerful abilities, skills, or combinations for the classes. So a much better route in this situation would be to actually buff the ones that are falling behind, like we've talked previously about the Devastator and the fact that it feels a little bit behind everybody else because it is lacking a certain weapon damage increase ability, which can also be made permanent with a few mod combinations here and there. So we could very well see a adjustment for the Devastator, maybe to increase its abilities, and alongside with this I would then also expect maybe a buff across the board for most of the spells in the game, so that anomaly power builds could also be viable for the end game. If People Can Fly doesn't do that in this update, I really hope that they do it as soon as possible, because there are some really crazy combinations out there that I really enjoy. I think that they can work really great, but they are just overshadowed by the pure basic weapon damage. Also, since we are on the same note, there are a couple of combinations in the game right now that kind of provide infinite ammo. Well, you can actually achieve that in multiple ways. The most notorious of them all is probably going to be that Perpetuum Mobile, which essentially gives you ammo replenish when you're killing a target with 35% or less ammo left in your, well, weapon, but that might be readjusted. I greatly fear that that's gonna be readjusted, and I kind of also fear that People Can Fly never intended for us to run with constant ammo and not have to replenish it at all. Now, there's a different combination that can work in a similar way. One of them is where you would apply bleed on the target, and then with a certain perk on the armor that you can get randomly, you can get 50% ammo back when you kill an enemy under the effect of bleed. So again, I'm not saying that these should be nerfed, I'm not saying that these should be buffed either, I'm just saying that if I were you, eventually I would expect for some of these things to be rebalanced, because I don't think anybody intended for us to run with infinite ammo and shoot at the highest damage possible. And maybe alongside with this, they might readjust the higher difficulties as well. Who knows? It's just a theory that I have, but usually this is the route that the developers go with. Of course, you're free to leave your opinion down below and tell me what is your stance on that. Would you prefer just buffs for everybody who's lacking, or would you like a more classical approach where things get both buffed and nerfed so that things get readjusted at the same time? So totally let me know in the comment section down below. But on a final note, there's a really interesting article by The Gamer that I wanted to kind of go over with you guys, because I'm really interested in what's your opinion on all of this. So Outriders needs end game DLC, not more story content, and there's some pretty interesting points right here that I wanted to go over, because I don't necessarily disagree with this one, but at the same time I also don't fully agree with it. So the article makes a pretty good point, which is the fact that you have to play through the entirety of the 26 hours plus campaign to reach the maximum level and start farming for meaningful gear. So they essentially make the argument that the end game actually only starts after a pretty lengthy leveling process and a pretty lengthy campaign in their view, which I don't agree with at all for, well, one reason and one reason only, story, and that is because this is by design. They essentially added another layer of progression and more content as a result just by finishing the game, which other games don't usually do. They either add it later or sell something separately, but no, in this case it's all included in the same kind of game. So even if like the game only released with world tiers and world tier 15, I think that people would have been still happy, but the fact that we also get the challenge tiers on top of that, I think that that's something that the company should be praised for rather than make an argument against it. Maybe it's just my opinion. Even more so when once you finish the main campaign and you reach that world tier 15, you feel like a breath of fresh air when you start doing something different that you didn't do before, like these specific expeditions, which by the way, if you haven't done them already, they are so amazing. They're completely different new zones with sometimes completely new bosses that we don't have in the main campaign, and damn, they are difficult. They are extremely difficult and you will get destroyed, but the challenge is really amazing. Now, the article also makes a pretty compelling argument for the idea of more endgame content past challenge tier 15. So they pretty much know that there's no pinnacle activity that lets you push your eye level 50 gear to the maximum once you're finished with CT 15 missions. Expeditions are a lot of fun, but Outriders endgame doesn't offer the kind of replayability one might expect from an ARPG, which is on one side quite true. So it all boils down to the question, what should we get next? Should we get more stories, which seems to be the intent for People Can Fly, or should we get more endgame activities like something to further farm? So yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting idea, but personally, as I was looking into all of the details, I always thought that whatever DLC People Can Fly will release next might very well include a level bump or a level increase, since this hasn't been completely off the table even for them. So I thought that with the introduction of new story points, they would also introduce new challenges along the way, so you would essentially complete those challenges and new story elements would be part of them anyway, and maybe somehow integrate them into the end game. So adding new farming zones with a new DLC, adding new boss fights, or at least one boss fight to go ahead and farm and get the best loot possible wouldn't be such a bad idea either. But this is it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.